I call them the member for Heffron. Sorry.
Mr Acting Speaker, I have the honour to lead for the opposition in respect of the Protection of the Environment Operations Amendment Illegal Waste Disposal Bill of 2013 and indicate to the House that the opposition supports the bill and supports the bill on the basis that any enactment that increases the power to take action against illegal dumpers should be supported. Amendments to legislation is often enacted because of some particular event or occurrence. Something triggers the need for the government of the day to increase the powers of the EPA and to increase penalties. I looked at the Minister's second reading speech and I noticed that she commenced her speech by making it clear that this government will not tolerate serial waste dumpers, those who flout the laws that are there to protect the health of our communities and the health of our environment. She told the House that we are all sick and tired of people who take the law into their own hands, flout the laws, illegally dump, and illegal dumping is a despicable criminal act, and the government is taking action to ensure those people's illegal actions are dealt with by application of the full force of the law. And that is the premise of this bill. However, when one looks at what caused the bill to be enacted in the first place, and when one looks at the way the government, or particularly the EPA, has conducted itself that asserts that this bill is a solution to a difficulty they had in dealing with rubbish dumping, the House will be able to see how erroneous that assertion is. The reality of the situation is this. This bill comes as a result of a decision by the Land and Environment Court in New South Wales, a decision by Justice Payne on the 19th of February 2013 in a decision of the Environmental Protection Authority in Hannah that is reported in 2013. New South Wales Land and Environment Court reports at page 41, whereby Mr Hannah was found guilty of contempt of court, sentenced to 3 months imprisonment, and that sentence was suspended. When one looks at Justice Payne's decision and the circumstances for this particular conviction, one is quite concerned about the way in which the Environmental Protection Authority has mishandled one of the most serious acts, environmental acts, criminal acts that a person can commit, and a criminal act that should not have been dealt with in the way in which Mr Hannah was dealt with, but should have been dealt with in another way. Now, if I can just remind the House this. Mr Hannah was dumping building material that contained asbestos. Now, Mr Hannah wasn't new to the process of dumping asbestos. Mr Hannah had quite a lengthy record for being an illegal dumper. Mr Hannah had 8 prior convictions. Mr Hannah had also previously been issued with 22 penalty notices. We in this House all know how dreadfully serious it is for rubbish dumpers to be dumping asbestos in building materials. We know how outrageous it is for a person to have 8 previous convictions and also to have 22 penalty notices. And what does the EPA do when they catch Mr Hannah dumping building material, again containing asbestos? They go to the Land and Environment Court and implement Class 4 proceedings, civil proceedings, seeking injunctions, seeking orders to be restrained. So off they go to the Land and Environment Court with this criminal rubbish dumper if I might use the minister's words, or the effect of the minister's words, and they take out civil proceedings. They get an injunction against a bloke who's got 8 convictions and 22 penalty notices. Do you think he's going to pay any attention? They go back 3 times to the Land and Environment Court and get variations of orders from Justice Sheen and others in the form of an injunction. And what do you think Mr. Hanna does? He goes and dumps rubbish again. Goes and dumps it again, and then they take contempt proceedings, and as a result of taking contempt proceedings, he only gets a 3-month suspended sentence. Well, that's the number for a contempt of this nature. So what does the minister do? She runs to this House with legislation. We don't tolerate rubbish dumpers. These are terrible criminal acts. That's why we're going to have this particular bill. Was there anything else that the EPA could have done at the time? What else could they have done? Well, let me inform the House of Section 115 of the Protection of Environment Operations Act 1997. If a person wilfully or negligently disposes of waste in a manner that harms or is likely to harm the environment, the person is guilty of an offence. It's pretty clear, isn't it? If you're a serial waste dumper and you're dumping asbestos, are you either willfully or neglectingly disposing of waste in a manner that harms or is likely to harm the environment? One would think obviously you are. What are the penalties or the maximum penalties under Section 119 of the Act for a Tier 1 offence? In the case of an individual, to a penalty not exceeding $1 million or 7 years imprisonment, or both, for an offence that is committed willfully, or $500,000 or 4 years imprisonment, or both, for an offence that is committed negligently. I would suggest that the evidence before Justice Payne in the Land and Environment Court indicates that Mr. Hanna acted willfully, particularly bearing in mind that he admitted his offences there. So the reality is, on a prosecution of an offence under Section 115, Mr. Hanna could have faced 7 years imprisonment. Now, I would think a serial rubbish dumper who is dumping asbestos waste unlawfully deserves the full force of the law. I mean, after all, that's what the Minister of Environment told this House in her second reading speech when she introduced the bill. She said the government is taking action to ensure that those people's illegal actions are dealt with by application of the full force of the law. Well, how about the Minister look at Mr. Hanna and find out why the EPA didn't get off its backside and act in accordance with the powers that are vested in them. Now, I know the Minister under the Operational Act herself hasn't got the power to direct a prosecution. They are contained within the Act. Actually requires the EPA board to make decisions. But however, what do you think guides the EPA board? What guides them, of course, are the guidelines that they have issued under the Act. And the decision as to whether to prosecute anybody under the Act are contained in the EPA prosecution guidelines. And in those guidelines, after referring to the well-known prosecution guidelines that apply both in the United Kingdom and also here in New South Wales, so on virtually any test of the EPA's guidelines, this man should have been prosecuted. This man should have faced a decision of the court as to whether he was guilty or not guilty of a serious environmental offence, and he could have faced a maximum of 7 years imprisonment. And why didn't the EPA board make the decision to proceed with a prosecution? So if the Minister is actually really serious about ensuring that rubbish dumpers, these heinous offences, are dealt with in the full force of the law, then she better conduct an inquiry in relation to the EPA and the EPA board. She better conduct an examination when she, instead of coming up with a bill such as this and tinkering around the edges, and find out whether the very organisation that is giving her advice to address the problems of EPA and Hanna is a fit and proper organisation to provide accurate advice when they can't even make decisions to prosecute some of the worst environmental offenders. And the question that needs to be asked is whether the EPA is a competent organisation to decide whether to prosecute, or whether or not the prosecution provision should be removed from them and handed over to the Director of Public Prosecutions. Because any law student could have told you that this was a serious criminal offence, that they should have been prosecuted under section 115, and that with the record of this particular person applying the EPA's prosecution guidelines, there was no reason not to take the most serious criminal action against this particular person. And it is not the first time, when you look at the 22 penalty notices, when you look at the 8 previous convictions in the local court, nothing has previously been a deterrent to this particular person. So one then asks the question, if one looks at this particular matter, how many others are happening in New South Wales? How many other occasions are the people of New South Wales not properly being protected by the application of this statutory organisation in what I suggest to this House is a failure of its duty? And the Minister should discharge her duty and not be the pedestrian minister that she is, by ensuring that this organisation becomes properly accountable to this House and the people of New South Wales. This really is quite a scandalous thing to have occurred. Now, bearing in mind that the EPA board is supposed to make these decisions, there should be a record, and when the Minister comes back in reply to this particular debate, no doubt you would have got some advice from the EPA, asked for the records and decisions of the EPA board so she can conduct a review as to why this man was not dealt with as he did. The decision of Justice Payne is a public decision of the court. The facts of the matter are contained within her decision, within the decision of Her Honour, and one will be able to see precisely why the decision of the court was made as it was made in relation to Hannah. It was not a failure of the Act or the penalties, it was actually a failure of the EPA and a failure of a process of an organisation that has been unaccountable to various ministers for more than 2 particular decades. An organisation that has failed this state for decades of not exercising its statutory power when it should have. So when things blow up in Newcastle Port in relation to Orica, when there's contamination at Botany and Port Botany, when there's groundwater contamination, when there's air pollution, when there's coal dust at Newcastle, when people are suffering as a result of a variety of pollutions, it's been the EPA with the power to stop it. It's been the EPA with the power to prosecute. And it's been the EPA that has failed this state, just as the State Pollution Control Commission, its predecessor, failed. Now, it was a Conservative government under the Greiner government. It was Tim Moore that formulated the Environmental Protection Authority. He formulated it on the basis that the State Pollution Control Commission was a failure. He gave the EPA, he introduced legislation into this House, he made the appointments, he gave the EPA the power to tackle the vested interests and to tackle the polluters and to take action to protect the people of the state. And just like its previous organisations decades ago, it's been a particular failure. And one of the things that the Minister needs to do, she is accountable to this House for the conduct of that organisation. Now, this occurred under her watch, and she should answer to this House for that particular failure. There's one other issue I just want to raise in relation to this particular bill as well,